On count 2, the first-degree intentional homicide of Denise Kloss, I sentence you to life imprisonment without the eligibility for release on extended supervision.
Life sentences are well known to be given to society's most notorious offenders. But what happens when these sentences reach a whole new level of shocking? In this video, we break down the craziest life sentences of all time, featuring explosive courtroom reactions and punishments that defy belief. Case number 3 will leave you absolutely stunned.
Hands! Let me see your hands! Step out here! Step out!
Officers rush inside.
Get on the ground!
Why anyone thinks it's okay to assault a child sexually is a question that remains puzzling. The actions of Michael Webb turned the life of a family and an otherwise safe community upside down in a split second. On May 18, 2019, an 8-year-old girl and her mother had been taking a walk down their street on Fort Worth 6th Avenue. The peace of that evening was shattered when 51-year-old Michael Webb came out of nowhere and snatched the small girl away from her mother. He was in a car when he reached out of the window and grabbed her, pushing her mother away.
Help me! Help me, please!
In a desperate attempt to get her baby back, her mother tried to fight with Webb, even jumping into his car and trying to get her daughter back. However, Webb overpowered her and pushed her out of the car, driving away. The entire ordeal was captured on a neighbor's security camera. The video showed Webb speeding away and the mother started to call for help. Police quickly arrived at the scene and members of the community came to the mother's aid, doing everything they could to find her daughter. Due to the gravity of the situation, the major task force of the Fort Worth Police Department was dispatched. A search was organized and pictures and flyers of the missing girl were posted everywhere. During this period, Webb drove to a church parking lot and went into Forest Hills Wood Springs Suites Motel. Towards midnight, a breakthrough came when a tip led officers to Webb's hotel room. Webb knew that the police were around, so he threatened the small girl to keep her quiet, and then hid her in a small laundry basket. When the officers checked the room, they did not find the child or any traces of her. Even though they left at that time, they were soon given another tip that led them back to the hotel. A family friend of this missing girl saw Webb's car and called 911. The police responded immediately, and when they checked the car, they found blood on the front passenger seat. Officers went back to the hotel room, and this time, they let Webb know that they were not playing around. He refused to open the door, and they used a battering ram to gain access.
Hands! Let me see your hands! Step out here! Step out!
Officers rush inside.
Get on the ground!
This time, they found the girl more quickly because they found blood on the bed as well. They took the girl out of the laundry basket where she was still hidden and carried her out while they arrested Webb. The moment she was rescued was filled with a lot of emotion, with the police officers letting their colleagues know they did.
Hey, here she is! Got her! We got her! We got her!
Webb was arrested and taken to the police station where he was interrogated by FBI agents for more than 3 hours. He soon admitted to kidnapping and sexually assaulting the 8-year-old, as well as hiding her in the basket and threatening her life. He was charged with kidnapping, and in September 2019, his trial began. His trial only lasted 2 days, and the court was filled with tension during that period. Evidence of the kidnapping and Webb's confession were all shown in court. The victim's mother described her daughter as brave and strong, saying that the horrific incident does not define her. As expected, it took the jury less than 10 minutes before reaching a unanimous verdict. He was found guilty and it was time to pass judgment. In the meantime, a U.S. attorney addressed the court saying, "The defendant stole this victim's innocence. She knows that there is evil in the world. Evil has a face, and that face is Michael Webb's." Ultimately, Michael Webb was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The girl's family and friends were relieved after they heard the verdict. Michael Webb's horrifying crime was unthinkable, but the next case is just as chilling. Jake Patterson, a man who meticulously planned and carried out the abduction of Jamie Kloss, leaving a trail of devastation.
2, the first-degree intentional homicide of Denise Kloss, I sentence you to life imprisonment without the eligibility for release on extended supervision.
Patterson was 21 years old when he first noticed the 13-year-old Jamie Kloss at a bus stop on his way to a temporary job. This innocent encounter would spiral into something completely horrific. Patterson became obsessed with Jamie, and he began planning how to abduct Jamie. In October 2018, Patterson decided it was time to carry out his plans. The first time he tried, Jamie's parents were around and he was worried about being spotted, so he left. So on October 15th, Patterson wore a black coat and a ski mask before driving up to the Kloss' driveway, armed with a shotgun. Before he left home, he had shaved all of his hair and taken a deep bath to avoid leaving any DNA at the scene of the crime.
Third trip to the Kloss home for the purpose of kidnapping her. He took a shower and shaved his head and beard to make it less likely he would leave any DNA behind.
Patterson walked up to the door around 1 a.m. and tried to kick the door open. When Jamie's father tried to see what was going on, Patterson shot him, killing him immediately. Jamie's mother called 911, but she could not speak to the dispatcher. The two of them hid in the bathroom, but they were not safe from Patterson. He entered the bathroom, duct taped Jamie's hands, legs, and mouth before forcing her to witness the murder of her mother as well. Patterson dragged her into his car and drove away. Despite being in a small town, Jamie was not seen by anyone for 88 days. Patterson took her to his remote cabin and trapped her under his bed before blocking all possible spaces with heavy workout equipment that he knew Jamie couldn't move. When visitors, including his father, came to the cabin, he would hide her under the bed and threaten to hit her if she tried to ask for help. Jamie was forced to stay under the bed for as long as 12 hours at a stretch. This whole ordeal would come to an end on January 10, 2019. Patterson told her that he was going to apply for a job and left her under the bed as usual. When he left, Jamie used the opportunity to escape and saw a woman who she asked for help. The woman recognized her and called the police. Jamie told them who had abducted her, and Patterson was arrested. He quickly confessed to all of the charges and showed remorse for his actions during the investigation and hearing. He was teary and apologized to Jamie as he pleaded guilty to his charges.
Statement of Jamie Kloss.
Okay.
Last October, Jake Patterson took a lot of things that I love away from me. It makes me the most sad that he took away my mom and my dad. I loved my mom and dad very much.
In court, the prosecutors read a statement that Jamie had written, describing how she felt about what he did.
I sentence you to life imprisonment without the eligibility for release on extended supervision. I am granting 134 days of credit already served.
Ultimately, Patterson was sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole and 40 years. Jake Patterson's calculated abduction was horrifying, but the next case delves into one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history.
Find unanimous agreement. Count 1, guilty.
Tyre Nichols decided to enlist in the United States Army in 1988 when he was 33 years old. He wanted to escape the farming life and decided that the only way to do this was to join the Army, since his other attempts had failed. Nichols had been initially married to a woman named Lana Walsh and was mostly a house husband. After Nichols joined the Army in 1988, Lana filed for divorce. After he enlisted in the Army, he was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, for basic training. There, he found it difficult to adjust to the training regimen because he was the oldest man in his platoon. He was mostly called Grandpa by the other men. Because of this age difference from the others, he was made the platoon guide. It was at this time that he met Timothy McVeigh, another member of his platoon who he soon became close friends with. They bonded on their similar backgrounds. Both men grew up in white rural areas, tried going to college for a while, and were children of divorced parents. They also shared an interest in gun collecting and the survivalist movement. After training, Nichols and McVeigh were stationed to work in Fort Riley in Kansas, becoming even tighter friends. They also met another man named Michael Fortier and became a trio of friends. Nichols didn't last long in the Army though, because of a conflict with his ex-wife over childcare. He received a hardship discharge so he could go home to take care of his son. During this period, Nichols' anti-government views grew stronger. He lived most of his adult life in areas where mistrust and resentment of the federal government were common. Nichols followed sovereign citizen ideology and tried to renounce his U.S. citizenship by declaring himself a non-resident alien. This got him into trouble with the court over unpaid debts totaling $40,000. He refused to pay the debts. He also renounced his driver's license. After he left the Army, Nichols continued his friendship with McVeigh, and they soon started selling military surplus at gun shows. They started staying together at Nichols' farmhouse, and on April 19, 1993, they witnessed something that would change the course of many lives. They watched the siege of the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas. McVeigh and Nichols were furious and somehow took it upon themselves to pay the federal government back in their coin. For 7 months, Nichols and McVeigh stole dynamite and basing caps, bought large quantities of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, and robbed an Arkansas gun dealer. They also bought diesel fuel and the truck they planned on using to carry out the bombing. On April 19, 1995, the Alfred P. Murrah building was reduced to a skeleton of iron and beams. The bombing happened around 9 a.m. and killed 168 people. 684 people were injured, and more than $324 million worth of property was destroyed. This deadly domestic terrorism act was planned and executed by Timothy McVeigh and Tyre Nichols. McVeigh was the one who set off the bomb, but Nichols was essential in carrying out the plot as well. Nichols was at home with his family when the bomb went off. He soon learned that he was wanted for questioning, and on April 21st, he turned himself in. After Nichols' home was searched, many items that tied him to the bombing were discovered. They included blasting caps, detonating cords, ground ammonium nitrate, barrels made of plastic similar to fragments found at the bombing site, 33 firearms, anti-government warfare literature, a receipt for ammonium nitrate fertilizer with McVeigh's fingerprints on it, a telephone credit card that McVeigh had used when he was shopping for bomb-making equipment, and a hand-drawn map of downtown Oklahoma City. Nichols was charged with 8 counts of involuntary manslaughter of a federal employee, conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction resulting in death, 161 counts of first-degree murder, first-degree arson, conspiracy, and fetal homicide. The jury deliberated over Nichols' case for more than 41 hours over 6 days. While the death sentence was recommended for Nichols, the jury could not agree on whether he should be sentenced to death for his actions. So, on December 24, 1997, Nichols was convicted of conspiracy, first-degree murder, and other charges except for the crime of actually detonating the bomb.
We, the jury, find unanimous agreement. Count 1, guilty. Tyre Nichols is guilty. Conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction.
Nichols was sentenced to 161 life sentences without the possibility of parole, and 48 years for his involuntary manslaughter. This sentence makes Nichols the convict with the highest number of life sentences in all of American history. As for McVeigh, he was sentenced to death shortly after he was convicted. As Tyre Nichols faces the consequences of his devastating actions, the scale of his crime is almost unimaginable. But our next case shifts from a notorious bombing to a chilling act of violence driven by pure rage.
Later, his family and the public would be shocked to discover that Jackson's uncle had turned him into the police.
On the 6th of July, 2009, Nathan Potter, a 21-year-old film student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, was shot and killed in an attempted robbery while walking near his River West apartment. There were 2 suspects in his murder, 19-year-old Derek J. Thomas, and the actual man who pulled the trigger, 18-year-old Shondell Jackson. And both men were also alleged to have shot and injured another man about 12 hours later. Witnesses were able to identify Jackson from a group of photos, and evidence from both incidents suggested that the attacker had used the same .45 caliber handgun. Investigators were also able to find out about Jackson's accomplice, Thomas, who had been acting as a lookout. Both men were eventually caught about a month later, arrested and charged for their respective crimes before being detained. During a February 2010 hearing, the young Jackson's expression showed neither remorse nor sorrow over his actions, although he did eventually read out an apology. The father of the victim, John Potter, called his actions evil and petitioned the judge to give him a befitting sentence. Potter's mother also reacted to the situation, saying that Jackson didn't deserve any leniency from the court. Jackson was eventually convicted of his crimes, and on the 16th of April, 2010, he was handed a life sentence without the possibility of parole at the sentencing hearing. He was also handed 5 years for attempted robbery and 5 years for the non-fatal shooting which occurred on the same day. And the way he reacted shocked everyone in the courtroom. Nevertheless, Jackson still had the audacity to smirk at his victim's family as he was escorted out of the courtroom. Jackson's accomplice, Thomas, was handed a 12-year sentence for his role in the death of Nathan Potter, as well as the subsequent non-fatal shooting. Following the verdict, Jackson's family began to hurl insults directed at Potter's family, which more or less confirmed that he wasn't always influenced by the right people. But ultimately, he will have more than enough time behind bars to think about his crime as he spends the rest of his life in jail. Shondell Jackson's shocking sentence was a chilling reminder of how a single moment of rage can alter lives forever. But if you thought that was intense, wait until you hear about Ronnie O'Neal, a man whose horrifying acts and defiant courtroom performance left everyone speechless.
I did kill Kenyatta Barron, but I want you to tell it like it is if you're gonna tell it.
That was a shocking confession from 29-year-old Ronnie O'Neal while he was in court after he was charged with the murders and attempted murder of his family. O'Neal fatally shot his girlfriend, 33-year-old Kenyatta Barron, at their home in Riverview, Florida in 2018. After murdering his girlfriend, he hacked his 9-year-old daughter named Ron Nevaeh O'Neal with a hatchet until she died. He then stabbed his 8-year-old son, Ronnie O'Neal IV, and thought the boy was dead. It was then that he poured gasoline into the house and set it on fire. Ronnie O'Neal was found and he initially resisted arrest until he was tasered by police. While he was taken into the police vehicle, he said that his victim, Kenyatta, was the devil and that the children were the devil's kids. Ronnie O'Neal IV survived the attack with severe wounds and was placed in the ICU. Investigation soon started and the details will make you scared. Kenyatta's daughter, Ron Nevea, was autistic and a special needs child. Her brother would later tell the court that Ronnie O'Neal had dragged her from her room into her parents' bedroom before he murdered her there. He did this because he wanted to get her away from the wheelchair she used to move around. After she was shot the first time, Kenyatta had called 911 as she was trying to get away from Ronnie.
911, what's the address of your emergency? What's going on? I think I got gunshots fired at 4365 Rose Garden. I think I just heard 3 shots. Possible warrant at the address. Hello? And I heard him say, call the police, and I'm not hearing anything else.
8 minutes after this call, another call came in. This time, it was from O'Neal himself saying this.
I just been attacked by some white demons inside Kiki. Kiki, her name is Kiki, and she tried to kill me.
He was eventually psychologically checked and deemed fit to go to trial. He chose to represent himself for some reason, and the case went to trial in 2021. O'Neal was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of aggravated child abuse. He was also charged with 1 count of arson and 1 count of resisting a law enforcement officer.
Evidence is going to show that we are under some of the most vicious, lying, fabricating, fictitious government you ever seen.
Because he represented himself, Ronnie cross-examined his son, who he had stabbed. Ronnie O'Neal IV testified to everything that happened and what led to the deaths of his mother and sister.
Did he do something to your sister?
Yes, he hit her with an axe in the head, and then in the back, and the back, and then the head.
Then it was time for Ronnie to cross-examine his son.
It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
Did I hurt you that night of this incident?
Yes.
I did. And how did I hurt you?
You stabbed me.
Further on into the trial, Ronnie accused the prosecutors and law enforcement of fabricating and tampering with evidence to accuse him of killing Kenyatta Barron and her daughter.
And the evidence is going to show that law enforcement tampered with evidence to meet their such high burden of proof.
As he delivered his closing arguments, Ronnie O'Neal suddenly blurted out that he killed his girlfriend.
I did kill Kenyatta Barron.
Ronnie O'Neal confessed to killing his girlfriend. According to him, it was true that he killed Kenyatta Barron, but he needed the prosecutors and law enforcement to tell it like it happened. He insisted that they fabricated evidence, but after his bombshell confession, while he was under oath, all that was left was sentencing. The jury recommended the death penalty for Ronnie after the session where he confessed to murdering his family. On June 21, 2021, he was given 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole, as well as 90 years to run consecutively. The case, which has since been dubbed the Riverview Murders, was described by the presiding judge as the worst case she had ever seen in all her career. As for the sole survivor of the murders, Ronnie O'Neal IV was adopted by Detective Mike Blair, one of the detectives on the scene of the murder. According to the detective and his wife, they didn't have it in them to leave the boy in the hands of the state, for the fear that he would be bounced from home to home. He was officially adopted 6 months after the murders. His name was soon changed to Ronnie Blair, and he revealed during an interview that he felt loved and as a part of the family. Ronnie O'Neal's explosive trial left the courtroom in shock, but the chaos doesn't stop there. Up next, we have Frank Delian Jr., a teen whose tragic and senseless actions would leave a community grieving and a courtroom stunned.
As Diamond Alvarez's mother began walking towards De Leon, a bailiff holds her back. That's when the situation escalates with Diamond's uncle jumping in from the gallery and punching DeLeon. DeLeon's mother then jumps in and pushes Diamond's mother at one point, and the two fight in front of the judge.
Diamond Alvarez was unfortunately not around to witness just how much her family was ready to risk it all for her after her killer showed no remorse for the horrible end he gave her. Diamond Alvarez was 16 years old when she was brutally murdered by 19-year-old Frank Delian Jr. outside her home. On January 11, 2023, 16-year-old Diamond was shot 22 times when she took her dog for a walk. Her family heard gunshots and the family called the police after their dog came back home without Diamond. Her family went to search for her, and her brother found her just before she passed away. According to her family, Diamond died in her mother's arms after they did all they could to save her. Investigations showed that the two were on the verge of a breakup when Frank shot her. The two were in a relationship when Diamond found out that Frank had been cheating on her and was in a relationship with someone else. They had dated for about 6 months before they broke up. Even though his murder trial began almost 10 months after he killed Diamond, he didn't show up to the first day of his trial. This caused many people to ask questions, and law enforcement officers confirmed that he was in custody. They said the reason he had missed the first day of his murder trial was because he had gotten into a car crash on his way to the court that day and had to be taken to the hospital to get treated for the wound. However, since he didn't show up to his first day, he forfeited the $250,000 bond for his bail. After his bail was posted, he was released, and Diamond's mother was fearful as he lived close to her. She said they had received threats after they had demanded justice for their daughter. After he didn't show up, he was sent to a county jail after he was released from the hospital. He was eventually charged, and Anna Mikado, Diamond's mother, had to appear in court for the trial. It would have been a painful but calm trial if Diamond's family had not snapped from the despicable attitude that Frank had displayed. He had shown no remorse whatsoever, and this caused Diamond's mother to lose it. As she was giving her statement, Diamond's mother told Frank how she felt about what he did to her daughter. Frank smirked at her, and nobody knew what Diamond's mother was doing until she started moving fast towards Frank. She was stopped before she could get close to him, but that didn't stop Frank from almost getting mauled by the rest of the family. While Diamond's mother was being stopped, her uncle sprinted to where Frank was standing and jumped at him fully with the intent of attacking. Frank's mother responded to this and tried to defend her son by attacking Diamond's mother, which caused Diamond's aunt to attack and try to beat Frank's mother. Her uncle was taken into custody, but he was eventually released without being charged with anything.
That was wrong of us because we're not monsters. But it's so much hate because I want my daughter back. And what he did was horrible.
Eventually, Frank accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 45 years in prison for the murder of Diamond Alvarez. The judge and jury ruled that Frank had to spend at least half of his sentence in jail before he was eligible for parole. It would seem that Diamond's family had other plans to attack Frank, but he was quickly taken away before they decided to risk it all and attack him again. The emotional responses of these people are more than enough to consider permanently allowing convicts to be hit at least once by the grieving families. Frank Delian Jr.'s case showed the tragic consequences of teen violence, but the next story dives even deeper into the mind of a remorseless predator. Enter Michael Madison, a serial killer whose horrific crimes shocked an entire city. Michael Madison, a serial killer who faced multiple charges such as 3 counts of murder, sexually motivated aggravated murder, kidnapping among others, was definitely not expecting to be attacked in court after what he did. Between 2012 and 2013, under 9 months, Michael had killed 3 women in Ohio before he was arrested. He was read his charges and the potential punishment for each of his charges before he was sent to court. Madison was born on October 15, 1977, to parents Diane Madison and John Baldwin. He was the result of an accidental pregnancy, and Baldwin claimed that he was not the father of Madison. Madison would grow up with his mother and her boyfriends, who all mistreated him as he was growing up. Not much was known about Madison until 2013, when someone requested that the police examine the case of foul odor that was coming from a garage that had been rented to Madison. Upon entering, they found a decomposing body inside and 2 more in a backyard and the basement of an empty house. The bodies were all wrapped in plastic bags, and they were all in close proximity to Madison's house. Eventually, the police got a search warrant to search Madison's house, where they found evidence tying him to the murder of these women. After a short standoff at his mother's house, Madison was arrested. The victims were identified as Shatisha Sheely, 28, Angela Deskins, 38, and Sherelda Helen Terry, 18. Madison confessed to kidnapping, killing, abuse of corpse, assault, and mutilation of the 3 women. The details of what he did to them are too gruesome to describe.
How you doing, Your Honor? My name is Van Terry. Right now, I guess we're supposed to, in our hearts, forgive this clown.
Van Terry lost all composure when Madison smirked at him, showing no remorse whatsoever. He jumped at Madison and was quickly stopped by deputies before the session was stopped for a short period, before order was restored with the help of the police. The jury delivered no mercy for Madison as expected, so it was not a shock when Judge Nancy McDonnell announced that there was a unanimous decision to give him the death penalty. After his sentence was read and Madison was led away, the parents of the victims expressed their feelings upon seeing their daughter's murderer pay for his crimes. Madison continued to pay for his crimes as he awaited his execution in prison. It was learned that the inmates of the jail he was sent to severely beat and injured him after they discovered what he did. He was hospitalized for 2 months before he was sent back to jail. However, when he got there, he was again slapped and had his head smashed on a desk for his crimes. 3 years after he was sentenced, his mother, Diane Madison, was killed from multiple stab wounds by her 28-year-old grandson, Jalen Plummer, who pleaded guilty to all charges. Michael Madison's reign of terror ended with his conviction. But what happens when a trusted law enforcement officer becomes the villain? Meet Wayne Jenkins, a corrupt cop whose crimes within the force shook the very foundation of justice.
A judge sentenced Sergeant Wayne Jenkins to 25 years in federal prison.
You have a gun in? Probably, I would say 2 1/4 just by looking at it.
Inside the Baltimore Police Department, a sinister underworld was thriving. 8 police officers were found to be running an organized crime ring. Their nefarious activities orchestrated by none other than Wayne Jenkins. Wayne Jenkins, the head of the Gun Trace Task Force, wasn't your typical cop. His name became synonymous with corruption. Planting evidence was just the beginning. He masterminded robberies and even stole drugs from looted pharmaceutical companies.
Newly released videos show the officers pretending to open a safe for the first time.
Hey, Sarge! Hey, come downstairs right quick. They're about to get it open.
But in fact, prosecutors say they'd already gotten in, took $100 grand for themselves, then pretended this was the first time they'd laid eyes on the cash.
The Gun Trace Task Force was established with a noble purpose, but under Wayne Jenkins, its mission was twisted beyond recognition. Instead of upholding the law, Jenkins and his crew became the very criminals they were supposed to apprehend. Robbing people at gunpoint, stealing and selling drugs, they raked in over $1 million. But the trail of devastation they'd left didn't stop at financial gain. It included a haunting human toll. Recovered body camera footage revealed a harrowing encounter. Jenkins and his team attempting to rob 2 men in a car. The victims, desperate to escape, sped off. Jenkins pursued relentlessly, crashing into their vehicle and causing the death of Albert Davis. This reckless act not only shattered the lives of those directly involved, but also inflicted immeasurable pain on the victims' families, exposing the profound betrayal and corruption at the heart of Baltimore's police force. 7 years after the tragic incident, Davis's daughter was asked if she could ever trust the police again. Her response was poignant and revealing.
7 years later, we find out that corrupt cops who swore to protect and serve were nothing more than criminals. He apologized for it, Mr. Jenkins, but it still hurts.
But this is only part of the story. The real question is, how did years of organized crime go unnoticed within the police force? And how were they finally exposed? Surprisingly, the unraveling of this corrupt empire began with one man. His actions set off a chain of events that would eventually bring Jenkins and his crew to justice, revealing the extent of their betrayal. The turning point came with the conviction of a man who stole the that claimed a teenager's life. When the evidence was reviewed, wiretaps revealed a startling discovery. The voices of Wayne Jenkins and his 7 co-conspirators were heard repeatedly during the intercepted conversations. As investigators delved deeper, it became clear that the Gun Trace Task Force was entangled in far more than just rogue actions. They were key players in a sophisticated drug operation. It was uncovered that one of the task force members, Mamadou Gondo, had been providing protection to the drug crew, allowing them to expand their illegal enterprise into a lucrative million-dollar operation. This revelation was the linchpin that exposed the depths of the corruption and criminality that had infiltrated Baltimore's police force. In addition to the damning recordings, investigators uncovered irregularities in official records, suggesting tampering. With the overwhelming evidence piling up, the FBI had enough to arrest and indict the corrupt task force members. Wayne Jenkins was finally tried and sentenced to 25 years in prison on June 7, 2018. Witnesses described him crying during his sentencing, pleading with the judge for mercy. He had confided in his attorney that he couldn't face a life sentence because of his children. His lawyer noted Jenkins showed signs of remorse, reportedly telling the judge he was ashamed of his actions. This dramatic fall from grace marked the end of one of the most notorious corruption cases in Baltimore's history, bringing some measure of justice to the victims and their families. Wayne Jenkins' shocking corruption rocked the Baltimore Police Department, but he wasn't acting alone. Enter the Gun Trace Task Force, better known as the Goon Squad.
In the last hour, 6 former Mississippi officers were sentenced to 15 to 45 years in prison on state charges in the assault and torture of 2 black men. The officers pleaded guilty to charges including hindering prosecution, burglary, home invasion, and aggravated assault.
These 6 men, known as the Goon Squad, left many stunned with their choice of name, given their roles as law enforcement officers. The crimes they committed are so egregious and disturbing they will make your blood boil.
5 former deputies and 1 police officer entered this home, no warrant, no evidence that anything was happening there. And they proceeded to torture these men for hours using food, at one point a sex toy, and threatening an execution.
On January 24, 2023, in Mississippi, the so-called Goon Squad, comprising officers Brett McAlpin, Hunter Elward, Christian Dedman, Jeffrey Middleton, Daniel Opdyke, and Joshua Hartfield, inflicted brutal and inhumane torture on Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker for over an hour and a half. The officers, under the guise of a law enforcement operation, had responded to a report alleging that Jenkins and Parker had entered the home of Christy Wally, a childhood friend of Parker who had been paralyzed. Parker, her caretaker, was unjustly targeted. The Goon Squad forcefully broke down the front door and restrained Jenkins and Parker without a search warrant, initiating a horrific sequence of events. Wally was in the hospital when this horrific incident happened. The Goon Squad referred to Jenkins and Parker with slurs and insults while beating and torturing the men. Opdyke found an adult toy in the house and forced it into Parker's mouth. Another of the officers, Christian Dedman, threatened to the men, and he attempted until he realized that Jenkins had defecated on himself. If you thought this was all, you're wrong. Elward held the 2 men down and watched as Dedman poured cooking oil, eggs, chocolate syrup, and milk, among other kitchen ingredients, on them. Officer Joshua Hartfield also subjected Jenkins and Parker to further torment by using a taser on them while they were restrained. After nearly 2 hours of relentless torture, the officers ordered Jenkins and Parker to take a shower to conceal the evidence of their cruelty. Unfortunately for the victims, the horror was far from over. Elward forced his gun into Jenkins' mouth and fired, despite a failed initial attempt. The bullet inflicted severe damage, tearing through Jenkins' mouth, shattering his jaw, and exiting through his neck. Before fleeing the scene, the Goon Squad planted a gun and drugs in the home, falsely accusing Jenkins of having fired at them first. The Goon Squad then took the security footage from the house and discarded it in a river to destroy evidence of their crimes. They ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges, including deprivation of rights under color of law and obstruction of justice, among others. Lead attorney Malik Shabazz described the case as one of the worst he had ever encountered. The sentencing process was lengthy and overdue. Despite their guilty pleas in August 2022, the Goon Squad did not face sentencing until March 2024. As their sentences were read, the Goon Squad displayed a range of reactions. Brett McAlpin, who was considered the de facto leader or mafia don of the group, was sentenced to over 27 years in prison. His voice reportedly trembled as he addressed the court. The victims had described McAlpin as a tyrant or a king due to his commanding presence and his role in directing the other deputies during the torture. The rest of the Goon Squad acknowledged that the group would not have existed without McAlpin's leadership and influence. McAlpin offered an apology for his actions, but it was met with little consolation from the victims, who held him responsible for orchestrating the horrific events at the Braxton home. Daniel Opdyke, sentenced to 17 years in prison, broke down in tears as he addressed the court. His emotional plea included an apology for sexually assaulting Jenkins, but it was insufficient to undo the damage. Jenkins, accompanied by his aunt, chose to leave the courtroom in response to Opdyke's speech. Opdyke pleaded for sympathy by revealing that he had been sexually assaulted by his father until he was 8 years old, attributing his actions to this trauma. He was also responsible for handing over evidence from the Goon Squad's WhatsApp group chat to the police. After his apology, he was led away in chains, weeping as he exited the courtroom. Hunter Elward, who had shot Jenkins in the mouth, was sentenced to 20 years. In a tearful address, he offered a heartfelt apology to the victims for his actions, expressing remorse for shooting Jenkins and leaving him to bleed to death. Jeffrey Middleton received a sentence of 17.5 years for his role in obstructing justice and abusing the victims. Joshua Hartfield, who was sentenced to 10 years, was the only officer not affiliated with the Rankin County Sheriff's Department. His participation in the torture was attributed to his desire to join the department, where he had applied for a position. Hartfield used a taser on the victims and attempted to destroy evidence. During his sentencing, he choked back tears and wept as he apologized for failing to help those who needed him most. The man who got the longest sentencing was Christian Dedman. He was described as oppressive, sick, and the most sexually perverted of all the perpetrators for his actions. He threatened to rape the victims and poured multiple kitchen ingredients on them. Dedman was sentenced to 40 years in prison. He never addressed the victims directly, but he said that he would never forgive himself for the crimes he committed.
For, what, is given and what is done, I forgive that part. But other than that, he still did, what he did, and he has to be punished for that.
If I had to see them again, I would probably just start praying. I'd probably be scared out of my body.
While the Goon Squad lived up to their name, the same can be said about Desmond Mills and his sinister actions.
Desmond Mills pled guilty to excessive force and conspiracy to witness tampering today. He's now facing 15 years in prison. He's expected also to plead guilty to several other charges.
Desmond Mills joined the Memphis Police Department in March 2017 and quickly became part of the Scorpion Unit, a specialized predictive policing team. Scorpion, which stands for Street Crimes Operation to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhoods, was designed to utilize advanced data analysis and statistical algorithms to protect and prevent crime in targeted areas. Unlike traditional officers, the Scorpion Unit members, including Desmond Mills, operated in plain clothes and wore bulletproof vests labeled police. Their unmarked vehicles and covert operational methods allowed them to blend into their surroundings, making their presence less conspicuous to the public. This undercover approach was intended to enhance their effectiveness in identifying and addressing criminal activity discreetly. On January 7, 2023, Desmond Mills and 4 other officers from the Scorpion Unit stopped Tyre Nichols, a 29-year-old African-American FedEx worker and amateur photographer. At 8:24 p.m., just 2 minutes from his home, Tyre found himself in the midst of a harrowing encounter that would tragically alter his life. The encounter began with the officers pulling Tyre from his car and throwing him to the ground. As they tased him and issued threats, another officer further escalated the situation by deploying pepper spray into Tyre's face, intensifying his pain and confusion. Despite their efforts to subdue him, Tyre managed to break free and fled, prompting the officers to give chase. The situation escalated when the officers caught up with Tyre Nichols. What followed was a brutal and unrelenting assault. Desmond Mills, armed with his baton, delivered merciless blows to Tyre, while another officer pummeled him in the face. A third officer joined in, kicking Tyre's torso with force, causing severe injuries. Throughout this ordeal, Tyre's desperate cries for his mother pierced the night, but no one came to his aid, leaving him to endure the relentless beating alone. Paramedics arrived at the scene and Tyre was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Despite medical efforts, he succumbed to his injuries 3 days later, leaving behind a devastated family and a community grappling with shock and sorrow. Tyre's family attorney has accused the police officers of torturing Tyre to death, an allegation that has prompted the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to launch a probe into the excessive use of force during his arrest. 2 weeks after the tragic death of Tyre Nichols, on January 24, 2023, the Department of Justice and the FBI announced that they would open a civil rights investigation into the case. This decision heightened the scrutiny of the officers involved and added a layer of federal oversight to the local investigation. In the days that followed, the 5 officers implicated in Tyre's death were placed on administrative leave and subsequently fired from the Memphis Police Department. Their terminations marked the end of their careers in law enforcement. The investigations culminated in the arrest of Officer Desmond Mills and his 4 colleagues, who faced serious charges including second-degree murder, aggravated assault, kidnapping, official misconduct, and oppression. Despite the gravity of these charges, all 5 officers were granted bail and released shortly after their arrests. The Scorpion Unit, the task force to which they belonged, was disbanded in the wake of the scandal. In November 2023, Desmond Mills pleaded guilty to the state charges as part of an agreement with federal prosecutors. Desmond agreed to testify against the other 4 officers at their trials as part of the plea agreement. The prosecution recommended a 15-year sentence for Desmond. However, Desmond's sentencing hearing, originally scheduled to be held in May 2024, was postponed until November. He will be free until then. Desmond Mills' role in a deadly abuse of power was shocking, but the next case exposes another horrifying betrayal of authority. Marcus Eberhardt, a former officer whose actions during a stun gun incident led to a tragic and preventable death.
Sergeant Eberhardt guilty on all counts and Corporal Weems guilty of involuntary manslaughter, reckless conduct, and oaths of office. Now, the 2 were accused of tasing 24-year-old Gregory Towns to death back in April of 2014.
This is Marcus Eberhardt, a former police officer from East Point, Michigan, who ignited a nationwide debate in 2014. Alongside fellow officer Howard Weems, Eberhardt tasered 24-year-old Gregory Towns to death. On April 11, 2014, the 2 officers responded to a domestic violence report from Towns' girlfriend, Aisha Smith. She had called the police, alleging that Towns had abused her, prompting Eberhardt and Weems to visit the house. According to testimony, Towns attempted to flee upon seeing the police. After being caught and handcuffed, Eberhardt instructed Towns to walk to the patrol car. Towns, claiming he was too exhausted to walk, refused. In response, Eberhardt and Weems used their tasers on him repeatedly until he became unresponsive. Their intention was to force Towns to comply, but their actions resulted in his death. The prosecution called the act a violation because, at the time Eberhardt and Weems tasered Towns, he was already handcuffed and struggling to breathe. Initially, the defense argued that it wasn't the taser that caused Towns' death, but an underlying health condition, a rare sickle cell trait, that coincidentally led to his unfortunate demise. Eberhardt was eventually charged with involuntary manslaughter and felony murder. This wasn't Eberhardt's first brush with controversy. Past records revealed a pattern of aggressive behavior. This case underscored the urgent need for reform in police practices and the importance of accountability in law enforcement. During the investigation, it was revealed that Eberhardt had used the taser on Towns for more than 40 seconds, far exceeding departmental policy limits. The defense argued that Eberhardt was unaware of Towns' health conditions and was simply following his training to subdue a resisting suspect. Despite these claims, the excessive use of the taser led to Marcus Eberhardt being charged for Towns' death. This case marked a significant moment in Michigan's history. It was the first time a police officer had been convicted of a crime for using a taser on an individual. Eberhardt was eventually sentenced in December 2016. During the verdict, where he was informed that he could be facing up to 15 years in prison, Eberhardt appeared indifferent, showing no emotion or reaction. As the judge read the sentence, Eberhardt seemed more interested in leaving the courthouse. His lawyer expressed disappointment in Eberhardt's conduct, but offered little else in terms of defense or remorse. This lack of response from Eberhardt further fueled public outrage and underscored the tragic impact of his actions on Gregory Towns and his family. Ultimately, Eberhardt was sentenced to life in prison for his actions. While no recorded statements were made during the sentencing, it was reported that he released a statement expressing remorse. In his statement, Eberhardt acknowledged the profound impact his actions had on Gregory Towns' girlfriend and child. He said, "I am truly sorry for the pain that I have caused the Marshall family. I am aware that nothing I can say or do can bring back their loved one, but I want them to know that I am taking full responsibility for my actions." This statement, while expressing remorse, did little to undo the damage and suffering caused by his excessive use of force. This case brought intense scrutiny to the use of force and aggression by police officers. For Towns' family, the conviction brought a measure of relief, knowing that Eberhardt was held accountable for his actions. Aisha Smith, Gregory Towns' girlfriend, expressed a personal struggle with the situation. She stated that she would work to forgive herself for calling Eberhardt and Weems to the house, despite the tragic outcome. Marcus Eberhardt did not intend to murder Gregory, but in the next case, an officer destroyed his family's police legacy.
Official misconduct, fabricating evidence, false imprisonment, possession of controlled substances, and drug paraphernalia, and perjury. Wester joined the Jackson County Sheriff's Office in 2016, but it wasn't until 2018 that people started to question his actions.
Zachary Wester, whose father was a police officer, seemed destined for a successful career when he joined the Liberty County Sheriff's Office in 2015. However, within less than a year, he left Liberty County amid allegations of sexual misconduct. Despite these claims, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, located northwest of Tallahassee, hired him in 2016. At Jackson County, Wester quickly gained a reputation for his assertive and aggressive policing style. His high volume of drug arrests earned him recognition and respect within the department. Yet, as the summer of 2018 approached, investigators for the district attorney began to uncover troubling discrepancies in Wester's police reports and body camera footage. Zachary Wester's misconduct came to light when body camera footage revealed him holding a plastic baggie in his hand before searching a woman's vehicle, whom he later arrested for possession. This suspicious behavior prompted a thorough investigation into his actions. When investigators searched Wester's patrol vehicle, they uncovered ready-to-plant substances and paraphernalia in the trunk. Prosecutors argued that this evidence proved Wester had been carrying substances he used to plant on victims during traffic stops. The incriminating discovery led to Wester's suspension from duty in 2019. Later that year, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement completed its investigation, resulting in his arrest. Following his arrest, prosecutors were compelled to drop charges in over 100 cases involving Webster from his 2 years with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. One of the pivotal witnesses in Zachary Wester's trial was Teresa Odom, a victim of his misconduct. In 2018, Zachary stopped Teresa for a broken brake light and requested to search her truck. Despite her initial reluctance, Teresa consented to the search. To her shock, Zachary claimed to have found a bag of in her purse. Teresa adamantly denied having any drugs, but to avoid a protracted legal fight, she ultimately pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 4 years probation. Her conviction was later overturned once it was revealed that she was a victim of Zachary's deceitful practices. The defense tried to paint Zachary Wester as a dedicated family man and upstanding member of his community, emphasizing his regular church attendance and charitable contributions. His wife, Rebecca, begged for leniency, describing Zachary as a fundamentally good person who had simply made mistakes. Yet, the overwhelming evidence presented in court revealed that his actions were not just isolated errors, but part of a broader pattern of corruption. Zachary Wester was ultimately sentenced to 12 years in prison. The impact of his actions was profound, affecting numerous individuals and the community at large. In a measure of justice, the victims of Zachary's misconduct were awarded a $1 million settlement. This compensation seeks to address the harm and suffering caused by Wester's corruption, serving as a partial remedy for the extensive damage inflicted by his fraudulent conduct. In the next case, an off-duty Pentagon officer attempted heroism by killing 2 people.
Tonight, a former Pentagon police officer is facing more than 2 decades behind bars for a deadly double shooting in Montgomery County.
Meet David Dixon, a former Pentagon police officer who made headlines in April 2021. While off-duty and in the parking lot of his Maryland apartment complex, Dixon encountered a troubling scene. He reportedly saw 3 men attempting to break into a car. In response, Dixon drew his weapon and fired at the fleeing suspects. The incident resulted in the deaths of 32-year-old Dominique Williams and 38-year-old James Lionel Johnson as they tried to escape with the stolen vehicle. A third man, Michael Thomas, survived the shooting and became a key witness in the case. David Dixon claimed he had acted in self-defense, asserting that the burglars were driving towards him when he fired. However, video evidence contradicted this claim, showing that Dixon shot at the men after their car had already passed him, and there was no imminent threat to his life. Thomas highlighted that Dixon's decision to shoot was not a legitimate act of self-defense, but rather an attempt to prevent the theft of the vehicle. Dixon's attorney argued that he performed a heroic act by stopping the burglars from stealing the car. However, the surviving burglar, Michael Thomas, admitted to stealing the vehicle during a 911 call made after fleeing the scene. This incident was not an isolated example of Dixon's questionable use of force. In 2020, Dixon had previously pointed a rifle at a homeless woman who was wearing flip-flops in the lobby of his building. This pattern of behavior raised further concerns about his approach to using firearms and the implications for his actions as a police officer. Dixon was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his actions. Before being led away, he offered an apology in court, explaining that he had reacted instinctively based on his training, but expressed deep remorse for his actions. Despite his apology, the court's decision reflected the seriousness of his misconduct and the need for accountability in cases of excessive force. These life sentences are a stark reminder of the consequences when crimes cross the line. But the journey doesn't end here. Prepare for more shocking cases and jaw-dropping courtroom moments in the next video. You won't want to miss what happens next.